Welcome to Prime Suspects. Alongside Adam Bjorn and Prime Sports co-founder Joe Brennan Jr., I'm your host, Matt Landis. Adam, the NFL regular season is now in the books, as is the college football playoff quarterfinal. How were this past week's results for Prime Sports and Betcris?
Green. That was 4 greens, right? All winning states. And I'll actually go through some of the numbers. Kentucky held 9%, Arizona held 11%, Ohio 6.6%, and New Jersey 5%. So off to a great start for the year. Hopefully this is an omen that we can kick on and kick forward. But yeah, all in all, volume is been great. Results were good. So can't ask for any more after this weekend.
I know a lot of people might be used to hearing numbers like that from some of the leading sports books across the marketplace, but in a previous era, those numbers would have been astonishing. What do you think it says to you to get the results you did in a current climate without being as dependent on products like SGPs at Prime and Betcris?
Well, I will say it was probably a weekend of anomaly. When I looked at the year results, if we hold 1-2%, that's kind of the goal right now. And that's pretty good because we're against, the best of the assassins that those 4 states have to offer, plus even non-those states, because I know maybe not New Jersey, but there's still little groups and bubbles where people are calling in their wages and having someone locally place them as well. So it's always good to just finally have a week where you can just breathe and go, okay, their results, yes, don't expect it every week, but something to sort of lean into. And especially we have made some trading changes. We have done a few little adjustments as we sort of go through this process of potentially onboarding and acquiring Prime Sports and getting into that. So it's a good way to start the year. And hopefully we get expenses down and we just start charging forward. And again, this is a year. This is a big year. We've got literally 12 months full of sports all the way through. So it's a good way to start.
A good way to start the year for Prime and Betcris, and perhaps an even better way to start the year for the 5 who ran the gauntlet and got to Circa Survivor Week 18 unscathed, sharing a pot of more than $18.7 million, good for more than $3.7 million apiece. Adam, give us your reflections on this year's contest as both a participant and also as an analyst with Scott, aka Vegas Horse Pools.
Well, I've already lined up my gang of people to try and roll up many more entrants for next year. I'm coming after this hard. I mean, it was a good run. It's a lot of fun, I think. Survivor contests, no matter whether they're small, big, whatever they are. Definitely seeing that the ones that kind of survived had to pick certain things on those 2 tough weeks. Like they'd burnt all the good teams and were just stuck with what was stuck with. So maybe the strategy of saving teams isn't necessarily the way to go. But again, those results, Thanksgiving, Black Friday, and then, Christmas, whatnot, don't expect those to happen every year either. But, coming into it, there was 6 left, 5 got through. For the one that didn't, Bengals, I've been on that side of it for many, many times. And the fact that the other 2 teams that he did have, or they had, or whoever it was Atlanta and Tampa Bay, who actually both happened to win, it would even feel a little bit more painful. But there was no real surprises. I think one group that had the Jags used them over Atlanta, Minnesota. Gary had New England, Atlanta, KC. New England was the easy one there, especially being the only one left with them that game. So I think all in all, everybody had Atlanta. I think that was the only team that everybody had available. So they're trying to look for different angles and different spots to play. But I think, just unfortunate for one group that Cincinnati got rolled. Hopefully they had a big hedge bet there on the Browns at big odds pre-game. And even live, they got out to decent odds because they weren't the first team to score. So, I'm looking forward to it already for next year. And it's always good doing the reviews Saturday nights with both the millions, which I've never gotten past like week 12 in the millions. I don't even know if I ended up in the money or not. I hadn't looked. I was tied 17 5 weeks ago. I shit the bed completely. Since then, went 7.5 out of 20 over the next 4 weeks. I didn't even bother to look where it all ended up. So maybe there's a penny or 2 there waiting.
All right, we'll definitely be circling back on Circa Survivor and Millions leading up to kickoff of next season. But Joe, let's bring you into the fold and not lose sight of what's ahead this season. What's your point of view, both on NFL Week 18 in the rearview mirror and the playoff picture that's right in front of us?
Well, in Week 18, I think it's interesting to see the number, this kind of how people value different things, talking about the teams. And of course, then it makes it difficult on us and it makes it difficult on the players. Like you just look at how many teams could have played for better seeding and kind of half-ass it. I think of like Philly as obviously the one that I'm going to know best. But where, it seems like the evaluation of getting players healthy, keeping players healthy, things like that is much more important than the valuation of ensuring, for instance, like homes, being able to get like at least 2 home games through the playoffs, and I'd really like to see the analytics on it because I guarantee there probably is the analytics on it. I think the other thing it says is probably what a lot of people already believe, which is there's no runaway team right now when you look at the playoffs, kind of like bridging into your next question. When I look at the future markets, that we have, like, for instance, on Betcris, Arizona, obviously the public is pretty, or at least the people who are betting with us, which is slightly skewed from just the public. Seattle right now, to be the Super Bowl winner, we're offering at plus 348. What's really interesting, though, is Denver, if you were following just simply a public line and best record and everything like that, Denver actually is like third with plus 663. It's the LA Rams, and I don't understand this, but LA Rams has the second best, or, the second highest with plus 456 right now. And they're a 5 seed. And I think a lot of this is narrative that plays into it. A lot of it is like, where's the money coming from? These are Betcris Arizona numbers. There's probably a lot of that halo effect from Southern California coming into effect. So when you round out the top 5, though, Buffalo is plus 864 right behind Denver. New England is just ahead of Philly as a 2 seed at plus 955, and Philly's plus 993. Not a whole lot of faith in Chicago as a 2 seed, and they actually played for it yesterday, right? So, right now, at Betcris, Arizona, it's plus 2,045. And I'm sorry to say the LA Chargers, I still want to always say San Diego, are at plus 2,922. So I do think it's interesting how some of the higher seed teams aren't really seeing as much flow, at least in our books, as they are maybe in the public books. So I think when you look at that, when you look at the kind of half-hearted attempt that some of the teams made in just fielding their junior varsity squads, whether they felt that they really had something to play for, whether they felt like they travel well, it wouldn't really matter, whether they don't respect the other teams in the tournament, I don't know. But this is probably the first time in a long time that I think you're entering the postseason where there's no one team that you look at, you're like, yeah, that's the team. So we'll see how it runs.
And Adam, I have a question for you building on this. Without a dominant team and thinking about some of the prices Joe just mentioned, I'm reminded of the notion of some people being inclined to place futures bets for the playoffs now, and others taking the route of a mechanical parlay, rolling over their bets on a given team each round of the playoffs, so long as that team survives. What's your point of view on, without a dominant team, maybe just keeping it simple, placing one bet now, versus the potential chaos we could see this year in particular, and going with that rollover parlay approach, even if it means a bit more work, a bit of line shopping between rounds for a potentially substantially better payout?
Yeah, I think generally, and again, depends on what you're seeing the other teams and who they can potentially meet up with and things like that. But I've always found that the parlaying it up, but it takes the discipline to take that money and put a larger amount than what you're used to on another game, and then a big amount, and then come Super Bowl, putting it in there when you feel like, well, maybe they're not value anymore, and you sort of take what you've got and collected to that point. So, it all depends on how you're looking at it and how much discipline and how much stick-to-itivity you have to that as well. Sometimes on the bigger odds ones, you just lay it down and let it roll kind of thing. But yeah, on those favorites, I think there's a lot more opportunities to build that up and end up getting and bigger odds as you run through.
Yeah, and one of my favorite angles of taking the mechanical parlay approach in the past is, should there be an injury, you also have a ripcord at your disposal between rounds if you want it. So something to file away. But I like that point, Adam, that the rollover approach can really be eye-opening when it comes to just how much exposure you might have should a team go on a run that entered as a long shot. But you're in the same situation with the standard futures ticket. It just often doesn't feel that way if you made one small bet as a flyer at the outset of the postseason. So some good food for thought there in terms of what people might want to consider from a futures perspective. But if we want to stick with the playoff picture and dive into wildcard weekend specifically, let's go one game at a time. with opening numbers and noteworthy early action from you, Adam. And then Joe will come to you for analysis on each game as well. First up, Saturday afternoon, Rams at Carolina in a rematch of the Panthers' 31-28 upset win in Week 13, when the Rams were a double-digit road favorite. Adam, how's it looking for Rams-Panthers round 2?
Yeah, so the line opened 10, still 10, slightly shorter on the Rams. Looking at 67% of the money on the Panthers, 94% of the master money on the Rams. Actually, they topped some 9.5 was where the bunch of that money come in. So yeah, right now it looks like most of the money on the Panthers, but the pros are on the Rams right now.
As someone who's inclined to play a teaser from time to time, any chance we see the Rams dip back to 9.5 and maybe a viable angle at a 7-point teaser, or is having Rams as a soft 10-point favorite a bit of protection against that angle as well?
Yeah, it's a bit of protection, but it does look like it's more likely to go to 10.5 than 9.5 based on the right people betting which side versus the overall money coming in.
And Joe, as I saw your expression, it may have been off camera to the audience catching this on video, but it seemed a bit eye-popping on your end. Dear Adam, say the amount of Masters money that's been on the Rams so far. Is that a fair read on your initial viewpoint on Rams Panthers?
Well, and that the Rams get to play the only team in the playoffs with a losing record right now. They get to play them at home. And I'm sure, the tape is fresh on that, on how they got jacked when they were on the road against them in Charlotte. Yeah, I might be looking for some other. When does this tape come out? When do we publish this? I got to get on this thing before anybody else moves those numbers. So, no, I mean, that seems like a pretty intelligent play.
All right, moving right along to the Saturday doubleheader nightcap and another rematch, this time a third head-to-head meeting of the season between Green Bay and Chicago. Adam, the Packers and Bears squared off at Soldier Field just a couple weeks ago on December 20th, with the favorite flipping during the week, if I'm recalling correctly, and Chicago going off as the short favorite and eventually winning and covering in miraculous fashion, ultimately in overtime. How's it looking this time around for Packers Bears?
So this line did open 1.5. The first bet was on the Packers, so it's down to 1 right now. About 62% of the money on the Bears, 100% of the master money, which was first money in on the Packers there. But yeah, I mean, they played, I think, twice in December, and it was within a touchdown both games. Both home teams won. So yeah, this should be a cracker of a game. I mean, for looking at the week one, this should be the best one, I imagine.
Joe, does that track on your end as well?
I mean, I think you just look at what we were talking about earlier about like futures money on Chicago being a number 2 seed. I don't think they're particularly well respected by our customers. So I'm completely unsurprised that all the Masters money is coming in on the Pack. Plus, I had to say that because Mrs. Brennan might be listening in, and she's a Packers owner.
All right, so we've got 2 big games on deck this weekend in the Brennan household. We'll get to the other one shortly. But first up, the first game of a triple header on Sunday, Buffalo, Jacksonville. Adam, how's the early action looking for Bills Jaguars?
So this seems a bit of a pattern here where a bunch of the money on one side and the Masters are on the other, which is, I think last week we actually presented our first Prime Sports Day to Play winner, right? We're 1-0 now, so we'll just shut down the shop. Looking at 84% of the money on the Jags, 100% of the master money so far on the Bills. Jags have just been hot the last 8-9 weeks, but it's the Bills, so this one will be interesting.
Joe, I know you might be pre-gaming for the next game, but when it comes to Bills Jaguars on Sunday, what are you going to be watching for?
No, again, I think you look at the way that Jacksonville is translating in our futures market versus the way Buffalo is. Jacksonville being a 3 seed versus Buffalo a 6 seed, you would imagine those seedings would be flipped based on what we're taking in futures. I don't think that there's a whole lot of people that have, well, the public does, but the public's, they've got recency bias. I don't think there's a sharp person who's watching the Bills and thinking that they've done anything other than sleepwalk through the regular season so that they could get to the postseason. They're just so much more battle hardened. I think this would be an easy side to come down on, picking Buffalo.
And next up, it's the main event, at least for some in the Brennan household this weekend. San Francisco, Philadelphia, a rematch of the 2023 NFC Championship game. Adam, how is the early action looking for 49ers Eagles?
So this one's been the biggest mover so far from 3 to 4. We're looking at 87% of the money on the Eagles, 94% of the master money on the Eagles. But yeah, this is the biggest mover so far, opening 3, now 4. I need San Francisco. It's the only future left, but after the way they looked the other night, I don't feel too confident on that one.
All right, Joe, I'm guessing Adam's analysis has you feeling better than you did a few seconds ago. And on the flip side of that coin, I'm just going to throw out that unlike that 2023 NFC Championship game, pretty safe to assume San Francisco will get the benefit this time of healthy and competent quarterback play. What are your thoughts for this matchup between the 49ers and your Eagles?
I'm always interested when I hear people from the wrong side of the country talk about that game as if somehow, like Brock Purdy and Josh Johnson slipped on banana peels on their way onto the turf at Lincoln Financial Field. No, they left Hassan Reddick unblocked and he buried his helmet in both of their chests. So that was football. Now, they do benefit from the rule change, which allows them to bring a third quarterback. So Christian McCaffrey doesn't have to run a wildcat if any of that should transpire. But again, this is another one of those where San Francisco isn't, based on what they're taking down in our futures markets, doesn't seem to be inspiring a whole lot of confidence. They're not a particularly good road team, and they're just not there yet. And losing 13-3 to Seattle the other night. Seattle does not have the defense that I think Philadelphia does have right now. Their defense is really peaking at the right time. So I'm kind of unsurprised about this, but this would be a good time for me to mention that I have a steadfast rule in which I will never ever place a bet on a Philadelphia team because I'm just too emotional about it. So I'm just too emotional about this. But I'm glad all the smart guys, all the smart money, and Adam seem to be coming down on Philadelphia.
And speaking of a vested and emotional rooting interest, Sunday's nightcap, the biggest game in my world this week, the Chargers heading back east to take on the Patriots. I've got shades of Marlon McCree picking off Tom Brady only to fumble the return back in 2007. And then Phillip Rivers playing on a torn ACL in Foxborough, but the then unbeaten Patriots prevailing in the AFC Championship game in 2008. And of course, New England more recently steamrolling the Chargers in the divisional round in 2019. I'm not expecting, but I am hoping for a different result this time around. Adam, how's it looking based on the early action?
This number is solid at 3.5, betting both sides, both on the master charts and the non-master charts. So it looks like it'll go into the game a solid 3.5 with how it's looking right now. I actually thought 3.5 felt a little light with the Patriots and how they've been going. So I was surprised that it was only 3.5, but bettors are saying that it's the right number because they're playing both sides pretty strong.
Yeah, when I first saw that line, I had to go back and see if Drake May or somebody on the Patriots had gotten injured against Miami. I was thinking this would be quite a bit higher. Maybe that's the self-defeatist fan in me. Joe, more neutral party for this game. What do you make of Chargers-Patriots?
Yeah, I just, the Chargers happen to travel all the way to the East Coast for this game. And obviously the Patriots and Drake May, spectacular year. Mike Vrabel, I think, for a team that's been out of the playoffs for so long, like the Patriots have been, having somebody like Vrabel and some of the guys that he's brought in that have that Patriot culture, that Patriot winning culture, I think that's kind of the X factor here. Those guys aren't going to come out of the tunnel like a team that's laying 3.5 points. This would be interesting to see if you really wanted to take a runner on this one and it winds up being a double-digit difference by the end.
Yeah, and I haven't checked the weather, but mightn't the Chargers come out of the airport like Cool Runnings? And the Jamaican bobsledders coming out of that. I imagine it could be cold this weekend.
Yeah, I will say, in a colder game in Kansas City a few weeks ago, the Chargers seemed relatively unfazed. And this is a weird matchup where Jim Harbaugh might be rooting for more brutal winter weather because the Chargers are not the team with a better passing attack. So I hear you, Adam. Coming from LA, it might be a bit of a shock to the system, but it might also not be the worst thing just based on the way their roster is currently constructed. Moving right along to the wildcard weekend finale, Monday Night Football pitting Houston against Pittsburgh after the Steelers won the AFC North in dramatic fashion last night. Adam, what's the market making of that Steelers win, or are they really giving an early look to Houston in yet another matchup? I think a theme of the week, a lot of road teams being seen as the significantly better teams.
Yeah, this one opened 3, pretty solid at 3, maybe slightly going to -15, -20 on Houston. On the money side of it, looking at 75% of the money on the Houston Texans, but 88% of the master money on the Steelers right now.
Oh, my God. That's unreal.
Joe, tell us what you make of that.
There's too many people in sports betting from Pittsburgh. I'm thinking that they ought to have my rule where they don't bet on their hometown team because their heart's in it too much. No, I could totally see that. They have it. To me, it's going to be like you have people I think are factoring in the Aaron Rodgers effect. He's so much more experienced, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess I'm not surprised by that one right now. But yes, there are too many people betting with their hearts in this industry or from Pittsburgh.
All right, well, Adam, we'll come back to you for one more broad question to close out this segment. I know we talked a bit about futures earlier, but if we want to try to see the forest from the trees when it comes to betting the playoffs and think strategically for a moment, if you put yourself in the shoes of a bettor looking to find an edge during wildcard weekend, what advice can you share about how to approach it in terms of when to bet, which markets might be most advantageous, and any other strategies that might be effective?
Well, I think one of the biggest ones is that teams try and put the foot on the throat and run away with these games. In regular season, you get those backdoor covers and some of those things. I don't think we'll see it as often in the playoffs. And I, for a very long time, got caught on that because I was always looking for the teams coming back or getting on the, underdogs or favorites as the prices went out. And then the live betting. I mean, still the most inefficient markets in NFL are the live betting, especially if there's an injury, especially if there's sort of different things happening in the game, momentum shifts, things like that. So I think that's sort of the opportunity of just watching the game. For me, it's more of an eyeball game of I have the data, yes, but I'm still looking at the game, looking at the feeling and whatnot, which is, again, I think the inefficiencies of the whole thing because data generally runs it. And if you can find a way to sort of knock that data off kilter and find those spots to go against data calls sort of per se, those are the opportunities. And live betting's where all that is now. So sit down, take a beverage, watch the game, and get ready with that thumb to fire away at some point in time when you see value and trust your gut. I mean, if you've been doing this long enough and you've been watching it, there's a lot of games, go from one to the next. You don't have to play them all. But if you're on the wrong side on one of them, just get back on the horse and keep going. My responsible gaming notice.
Yeah, we probably won't be hearing that word for word on any 1-800-GAMBLER PSAs in the near future. But I hear what you're saying. I think more broadly about trusting your gut and not just being married to the data at this point of the season, especially because it can be a different game once we get to the playoffs. To your first point about the playoffs having a different element of the more dominant teams often stepping on the throat of the opposition, how much, if at all, do you see that factoring into the biggest spread of this weekend slate in Rams double-digit favorites on the road at the Panthers?
Well, again, last time in there, they were double-digit favorites and lost the game. And if they get up, they'll continue going and they will not stop until it's clearly in the bag. And that's where I think some of these favorites in weekly games, I steer away from favorites just because it's going through the monotony of a season and you don't know where they're at that particular week and they can just be going through the motions. It's playoffs time. They're coming to win. They know there's no next week. This is where laying 10 points isn't as scary as it is in week 15 or something like that. So, that's where the different mentality, and that's something that I failed at horribly early on because I would have been all over the plus 10 initially in this spot. But those favorites do cover probably a lot more in the playoffs than they do in the regular season. So it's laying numbers like that, you shouldn't be too afraid of if you have the conviction that it should be 12.5, 13 versus regular season when it's just a bunch of games and you're going through the process.
And to your point about live betting as well, I'd imagine a lot of bettors who bet live much more often than I do tend to look for a good plus number. Maybe there's a team facing an early deficit and they can get a number better than they could pregame. So that's when they go ahead and unload. But as you've talked about, if there's a team asserting its dominance, less likely to loosen its grip as a playoff game progresses, how does that affect your approach, both booking and live betting playoff games yourself?
Well, it's really dependent on the teams that are playing. Again, the offense versus defenses are generally stronger as well when they come into this. But then sometimes you can just break a good defense and the offense on the other side can run away with it. For me, live betting, the best times generally to bet, especially on a plus and what, is when you don't have the ball. Most of the value I find is when you're sitting on the other side and you're looking for a stop and things like that. So if you're in that position where you feel like you got a strong defensive team, the team with the ball is always half point, 1 point or something shorter than what they should be, I think, at times. Unless they're, again, a juggernaut and just running over the top of it and you're seeing the ball go from end to end and it just sort of opens up where the team with the ball at the end is the one that's likely going to win kind of aspect to it as well. So there's a broad range of games this weekend of defenses versus offenses, cold weather, possibly warm weather, but you just got to sort of take it as it comes and not get too tied to your opinions of what it was pre-game and watching the game and seeing how it plays out.
Joe, speaking of being flexible with opinions, in the MVP race, we've seen quite the roller coaster ride between Matthew Stafford and Drake May, with the most recent development being Stafford leapfrogging May as the favorite as of Sunday. When all is said and done, who do you see taking home the honors?
Well, did he leapfrog because of what he was doing on the field? Or did he leapfrog because Tom Brady said he should win it over Drake May? Is it the Brady effect, right? Brady's argument is that, well, Stafford's been doing it longer and that May is going to have plenty of opportunities to win this trophy in the future, being only a second-year quarterback. So, yeah, I mean, the argument is like how much of this is, Stafford getting a nod because of, again, the power of narrative in the betting markets, the Lifetime Achievement Award versus like the hot hand young guy all season. I wonder how much of Brady's position is also, it's like he wants to remain the quarterback god in New England, doesn't want anybody coming in and taking any of the sunshine off of him. But I think the more interesting market on this one may be if you could make a market on how quick prior to, the award actually being, or the winner being actually named, before the market spikes on inside information on Calcium Polymarket, because that seems to be really the interesting thing nowadays, combining like the insider trading news over the weekend with the potential for this year and what we've seen in the past in these markets. So, but in the end, I would be unsurprised that Stafford does win it because of the power of that narrative. I think it's that narrative that's also, in a lot of ways, is powering, the kind of money and interest that you see behind the Rams right now in the futures markets for the playoffs.
And Adam, you shared recently on this show that prime futures are on a brief hold, but Betcris is offering the MVP market in Arizona. So with that in mind, where do you stand in terms of the current price, and who do you expect to win it?
So this was interesting. I did actually dive into this one. When the markets opened, Stafford opened at 66s, Drake at 150. The biggest bet taken on Stafford was at 68 to 1. Drake was actually at 200 to 1. So there's someone with $7 at 200s. It's live right now, maybe looking to hedge and get out of it. When the season started, Stafford was 40s, Drake was 70s. And then that's sort of when it, in October, they were both still double digits. And then it was around sort of Thanksgiving where Drake May had sort of gotten to favoritism, and then Stafford flipped that Thanksgiving week, and then it went back the other way. So sort of been a two-horse race for some time. Right now, it's minus 225 Stafford, plus 180 May. Result-wise, they're pretty much balanced for us right now because we've laid May at minus 440 as well. So there's been some back and forth, both at odds on at points along the way. So if there's a third chance, it'd be a really good result. But these two are sort of both fairly well balanced, but close to break square. So nothing exciting for us there. But, it just shows that taking some of those shots preseason on some of these big price things, that it's not just always a Josh Allen or, some of these favorites that just keep rolling through there. So good luck to that one that does have that $7 at 200 to 1, Drake May.
And Adam, one more follow-up for you here. Joe mentioned the possibility of inside information playing a role here. With that in mind, how do you manage risk given the likelihood of some information asymmetry as we near the official announcement?
So, yeah, I mean, ideally, as you get close to these things, someone knows the result. I mean, there's a lot of things we've seen recently where known results are getting traded on, and it doesn't seem to have effect that a stock price or, insider trading of these things seem to have in recent years. But as Joe sort of said, now it's kind of praised rather than vilified. So the idea is that the traders are taking this down, well in advance, or at least reducing limits or whatever it is to make sure that that information that is likely to get leaked doesn't come and have an adverse effect on us anywhere where this is priced up at that point in time.
With that, we are nearing the home stretch of this week's episode. But Adam and Joe, I have a question for both of you. Jump ball, whoever wants to take it first, go ahead and weigh in. Spanky has shared that the board of the Sports Gambling Hall of Fame will begin deliberations this week on the 2026 inductees. If you were on the board, what are some names you would add for consideration?
So I'll take it first because it'll give Adam an opportunity to really build his rhetorical case at like, when will this Hall of Fame start recognizing people who are born and operate outside of the United States? But if I was going to say two people who I think would be very interesting, given like the way that the Hall of Fame has trended, one would be a kind of corporate establishment figure, and then the other one would be in more of the outlaw, self-starting entrepreneurial wing of the Hall of Fame. For the more establishment oriented, I'm actually surprised that Art Manteris isn't already in the Hall of Fame. He probably had the longest, most successful tenure of any corporate bookmaker in Las Vegas history. He actually built the Superbook, which for all you noobs out there was Circa before Circa, right? And he literally wrote the book on this, if you can find it, Superbookie, which is a really interesting read about him building the Superbook there at the formerly known as the Hilton, now the Westgate. So he's also he would fit really nice in the Pittsburgh wing of the Hall of Fame, and then also the amazing Franzi family tree wing of the Hall of Fame as well. We'll say, the outlaw side of things, I would say Joe Vito Mastronardo would be my nominee. Now, unfortunately, this would be a posthumous award because Joe Vito passed away almost 10 years ago now. He died in federal prison while serving time for bookmaking. But Joe was such an establishment on the East Coast and in Philadelphia. And to show you what the difference in culture was, is like Joe Vito was married to the only daughter of Frank Rizzo, who was the former mayor and police chief of the city of Philadelphia. Did not cause any ripples, any bad ways, anything. It didn't affect anybody adversely. So it was a much more accepted part of the culture. And his business was probably one of the real key businesses in the industry before legalization. So that would probably be my other nominee.
Very well said in both cases. And Adam, I'll turn it over to you for the non-Pennsylvania segment of 2026 inductees to consider.
No, I mean, for me, I wouldn't even be able to identify all the ones that are in there. So I could probably name one and that's already in there. But for me, there would be no sports betting across the US without Joe in there. So maybe he's the one that finally gets thrown in there as well. But, for me, I only went to the last year's, mainly was Vero was going in. There's quite a few that I could name that are probably not ready to get named at this point in time that would be, fit right in there with those ones that are in there. So it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out and who they come up with, because it's a shortened list. They've had some really big classes to sort of get this thing started. So I do hope that they start to sort of roll it back a little bit and just be picking, a couple here and there as they try and build it out. And I guess over the next, 5-10 years, then others will establish themselves in this position and it'll keep sort of the ones that are not, you've got to still keep some of those on the outside that maybe should be in, but they're on the sort of precipice of getting in and stuff like that. That's the whole point, I believe, of Hall of Fame structures of, there's those ones that teeter on the, should they be in, should they not? And that sort of makes it part of the interesting aspect of it as well.
Yeah. I mean, we obviously know some names of people who that, when it comes to like the kind of quality player that they are, quality bettor that they should be in there. But I don't think those guys want their name up anywhere right now, right? They want to keep it as low key as possible. But like the only thing I would say is like there's going to be some of those guys who, when they eventually hang up their Spurs and their Excel spreadsheets, they're going to be like automatic first year, escalated, whatever the hell it would be. They're not going to have to wait the 4 years after they retire to get considered. They should just go in right away.
And Joe, I'd be remiss not to circle back on the first name we heard from Adam. I know you scoffed when he mentioned your name, but I think he brings up a good point in the instrumental role that you played in bringing regulated sports betting to the United States. And with that in mind, I'd be curious for your perspective when it comes to your potential candidacy for the Sports Gambling Hall of Fame based on things that you have achieved in this space. I know there's some modesty at times, but you have achieved a hell of a lot in this space. And also knowing that whatever you may do directly, there's a board that makes some decisions that are wholly beyond your control in a sense. So how do you process all of that as somebody who, if you aren't already, will likely be in consideration at some point for an induction into the Sports Gambling Hall of Fame?
I don't know how you answer that question. Like if you say like, well, I don't want to be an asshole. I'm proud of what I've done. I'm proud, probably more so, of the people that I did it with. If anything, it would be like, if I ever made it in there, it would be like with the NFL Hall of Fame, like the builders category, where it's like some GM or somebody like that, or team owner or something like that, where they may be like the person going in there, but really it's a result of like such a massive organizational and team effort that they're just kind of like an avatar for something, So yeah, I mean, would I love it? Of course I would. I mean, the people who are in there are like gods to me. But I mean, if I can't get in there, if they could just put a plaque up in my booth at Saginaw's Diner upstairs at Circa, I mean, I'd be happy for that. But no, that would...
All right, Adam, we'll take it home this week, as we always do, looking specifically right now at the Fiesta Bowl between Miami and Ole Miss and the Peach Bowl between Oregon and Indiana, slated to be played later this week. How's the action unfolding at Prime Sports and Betcris, and who do you expect to see in the national championship game to be played 2 weeks from today on January 19th?
Okay, so Miami, Florida open 2.5 point favorite. They're currently 3.5. I look at about 61% of the money there, 58% of the master money on Miami as well. And then in the other game, there's a well more balanced, and the line opened at 4. It's currently at 3.5, but this is well balanced and by the masters as well. So, I mean, Indiana have been impressive. When I look back at my notes preseason, there was actually a couple of places that had tipped them at some decent odds. Mississippi showed up last week. That one's I've not got really an opinion on, but I think Indiana's just been impressive, and I'd like to see them just continue on and go on their merry way and win this whole thing.
And on that note, we will wrap up one of our longest episodes to date, but also one of our most loaded weeks to date. So to the audience, thanks as always for tuning in. As a bettor, as a fan, enjoy the inevitable chaos that's to come, and we will catch you next week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Prime Suspects. Register for Prime Sports at primesports.com and download the Prime Sports app. You can follow us on Twitter at PrimeSuspects_, at Joe Brennan Jr., and at Adam Bjorn 2. You must be 21 or over to play on Prime Sports. Always bet responsibly and within your limits. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER.